Hi everyone, this is Glenda Ganzon and welcome to my Human Anatomy and Physiology class. And for today's video, I'm going to be discussing the muscular system. So stay tuned. The muscular system is responsible for the movement of the human body. Attached to the bones of the skeletal system are about 700 named muscles that make up roughly half of the person's body weight. Each of these muscles is a discrete organ constructed of skeletal muscle tissue, blood vessels, tendons, and nerves. Muscle tissue is also found inside the heart, digestive organs, and blood vessels. In these organs, muscles serve to move substances throughout the body. There are three types of muscle tissue. The first one is the visceral muscle or the smooth muscle. The second one is the cardiac muscle. And the third one is the skeletal muscle. So the visceral muscle or the smooth muscle is found inside the organs like the stomach, intestines, and blood vessels. The weakest of all the muscle tissues, visceral muscle makes organ contract to move substances through the organ. And because visceral muscle or the smooth muscle is controlled by unconscious part of the brain, it is known as the involuntary muscle, and it cannot be directly controlled by the conscious mind. The term smooth muscle is often used to describe visceral muscle because it has a very smooth, uniform appearance when viewed under the microscope. And this smooth appearance is starkly contrasted with banded appearance of cardiac and skeletal muscles. Cardiac muscle can only be found in the heart. Cardiac muscle is responsible for pumping blood throughout the body, and cardiac muscle tissue cannot be controlled consciously, so it is an involuntary muscle. While hormones and signals from the brain adjust the rate of contraction, cardiac muscle stimulates itself to contract. The natural pacemaker of the heart is made of cardiac muscle tissue that stimulates other cardiac muscle cells to contract. And because of its self-stimulation, cardiac muscle is considered to be the autorhythmic or intrinsically controlled. The cells of the cardiac muscle tissue are striated, that is, they appear to have light and dark stripes when viewed under the light microscope. The arrangement of protein fibers inside the cells causes these light and dark bands. Striation indicate that a muscle cell is very strong, unlike visceral muscles. The cells of cardiac muscle are branch, X or Y-shaped cells tightly connected together by special junctions called intercalated discs. Intercalated discs are made up of finger-like projection from two neighboring cells that interlock and provide a strong bond between the cells. The branch structure and intercalated discs allow the muscle cells to resist high blood pressure and the strain of pumping blood throughout the lifetime, and these features also help to spread electrochemical signals quickly from cell to cell so that the heart can beat as a unit. Skeletal muscle is the only voluntary muscle tissue in the human body. It is controlled consciously. So every physical action that a person consciously performs, example, speaking, walking, or writing, requires skeletal muscle. The function of skeletal muscle is to contract, to move parts of the body closer to bone that the muscle is attached to. Most skeletal muscles also are attached to two bones across a joint, so the muscle serves to move parts of those bones closer to each other. Skeletal muscle cells form when many smaller progenitor cells lump themselves together to form long, straight, multinucleated fibers, striated just like cardiac muscle, and these skeletal muscle fibers are very strong. So skeletal muscle derives its name from the fact that these muscles always connect to the skeleton in at least one place. Most skeletal muscles are attached to two bones through tendons. So tendons are tough bands of dense regular connective tissue whose strong collagen fibers firmly attach muscles to bones. Tendons are under extreme stress when muscles pull on them, so that they are very strong and are woven into covering of both muscles and bones. Muscles move by shortening their length, pulling on tendons, and moving closer to each other. One of the bones is pulled toward the other bone, which remains stationary. And the place on the stationary bone that is connected via tendons to the muscle is called the origin. The place on the moving bone that is connected to the muscle via tendons is called the insertion. And the belly of the muscle is the fleshy part of the muscle in between a tendon that does the actual contraction. Skeletal muscles are named based on different factors, including their location, origin, and insertion numbers of origin, shape, size, direction, and function. For location, many muscles derive their names from their anatomical region. The rectus abdominis and transverse abdominis, for example, are found in the abdominal region. Some muscles like the tibialis anterior are named after the part of the bone, which is the anterior portion of the tibia that they are attached to. Other muscles use a hybrid of these two, like the brachioradialis, which is named after a region brachial and bone like radius. For the origin and insertion, some muscles are named based upon the connection to a stationary bone, which is the origin, and a moving bone, which is insertion. So these muscles become very easily to identify once you know the names of the bones and that they are attached to. For example, this type of muscles include the sternocleidomastoid, or otherwise known as connecting the sternum and clavicle to the mastoid process of the skull, and the occipitofrontalis, or connecting the occipital bone to the frontal bone. Another is the number of origins, and some muscles connect to more than one bone or to more than one place on a bone, and therefore have more than one origin. A muscle with two origins is called a biceps. So a muscle with three origins is a tricep muscle. And finally, a muscle with four origins is a quadricep muscle. Another is the shape, size, and direction. We also classify muscles by their shapes. For example, the deltoids have a delta or triangular shape. The serratus muscles feature a serrated or saw-like shape. The rhomboid major is the rhombus or diamond shape. The size of the muscle can be used to distinguish between two muscles found in the same region. The gluteal region contains three muscles differentiated by size: the gluteus maximus, or it is large, gluteus medius, which is medium, and gluteus minimus, which is the smallest. And finally, the direction in which the muscle fibers run can be used to identify a muscle. In the abdominal region, there are several sets of wide, flat muscles. The muscles whose fibers run straight up and down are the rectus abdominis. The ones running transversely or left to the right are the transverse abdominis, and the ones running at an angle are the obliques. Another is the function. Muscles are sometimes classified by the type of function that they perform. Most of the muscles of the forearms are named based on their function because they are located in the same region and have similar shapes and sizes. For example, the flexor group of the forearm flexes the wrist of the fingers. The supinator is a muscle that supinates the wrist by rolling it over to the face thumb up. In the leg, there are muscles called adductors, whose role is to adduct or pull together the legs. Skeletal muscles rarely work by themselves to achieve movements in the body, and more often they work in groups to produce precise movements. The muscle that produces any particular movement of the body is known as an agonist or prime mover. The agonist always pairs with an antagonist muscles that produces the opposite effect of the same bones. For example, the biceps brachii muscle flexes the arms at the elbow. As the antagonist for this motion, the triceps brachii muscles extends the arm at the elbow. So when the tricep is extending the arm, the biceps would be considered the antagonist. And in addition to the antagonist and agonist pairing, other muscles work to support the movements of the agonist. Synergies also are muscles that help to stabilize a movement and reduce extraneous movements. So they are usually found in the regions near the agonist and often connect to the same bones. Because skeletal muscles move the insertion closer to the immobile origin, fixator muscles assist the movement by holding the origin stable. So if you lift something heavy with your arms, fixators in the trunk region hold your body upright and immobile so that you maintain your balance while lifting. Skeletal muscle fibers differ dramatically from other tissues of the body due to their highly specialized function. Many of the organelles that make up muscle fibers are unique to this type of cell. The sarcolemma is the cell membrane of muscle fibers, and sarcolemma acts as a conductor for electrochemical signals that stimulate muscle cells. Connected to the sarcolemma are the transverse tubules or teeth tubules that help carry these electrochemical signals into the middle of the muscle fiber. So the sarcoplasmic reticulum serves as a storage facility for calcium ions that are vital to muscle contraction. Mitochondria, on the other hand, which is the powerhouses of the cell, are abundant in muscle cells to break down sugars and provide energy in the form of ATP to active muscles. And most of the muscle fibers structure is made up of myofibrils, which are the contractile structure of the cell. Myofibrils are made up of many protein fibers arranged into repeating subunits called sarcomeres. The sarcomere is the functional unit of the muscle fibers. Sarcomeres are made up of two types of protein fibers. They are the thick filaments and the thin filaments. For thick filaments, they are made up of many bonded units of the protein myosin, and myosin is the protein that causes muscles to contract. The thin filaments are made up of three proteins. The first one is the actin. Actin forms a helical structure that makes up the bulk of the thin filament mass. Actin contains myosin binding sites that allow myosin to connect to and move actin during muscle contraction. The second one is the tropomyosin. Tropomyosin is a long protein fiber that wraps around actin and covers the myosin binding sites on actin. And the third one is the troponin, which is bound very tightly to the tropomyosin. Troponin moves tropomyosin away from the myosin bonding sites during muscle contractions. So the main function of the muscular system is movement. Muscles are the only tissue in the body that has the ability to contract and therefore move the other parts of the body. Related to the function of movement is the muscular system's second function, which is the maintenance of posture and body position. Muscles often contract to hold the body still or in a particular position rather than to cause movement. So the muscles responsible for the body's posture have the greatest endurance of all muscles in the body, and they hold up the body throughout the day without becoming tired. Another function related to movement is the movement of substances inside the body. So the cardiac and visceral muscles are primarily responsible for transporting substances like blood or food from one part of the body to another. And the final function of the muscle tissue is the generation of the body heat. As a result of the high metabolic rate of contracting muscle, our muscular system produces a great deal of waste heat, and many small muscle contractions within the body produce our natural body heat. When we exert ourselves more than normal, the extra muscle contractions lead to a rise in body temperature and eventually to sweating. This time, let me discuss the skeletal muscles as levers. Skeletal muscles work together with bones and joints to form lever system, and the muscle acts as the effort force, the joint acts as the fulcrum, the bone that the muscle moves acts as the lever, and the object being moved acts as the load. So there are three classes of levers, but the vast majority of the levers in the body are third-class levers. A third-class lever is a system in which the fulcrum is at the end of the lever and the effort is between the fulcrum and the load at the other end of the lever. And the third-class levers in the body serve to increase the distance moved by the load compared to the distance that the muscle contracts. The trade-off of this increase in distance is the force required to move the load must be greater than the mass of the load. For example, the biceps brachia of the arm pulls on the radius to the of the forearm, causing the flexion at the elbow joint in the third-class lever system. So a very slight change in the length of the biceps causes a much larger movement of the forearm and hand, but the force applied by the biceps must be higher than the load moved by the muscle. For the motor units of the skeletal muscles, nerve cells called motor neurons control the skeletal muscles, and each motor neuron controls several muscle cells in a group known as a motor unit. So when a motor neuron receives a signal from the brain, it stimulates all the muscle cells in the motor unit at the same time. So the size of the motor units varies throughout the body depending on the function of the muscle. Muscles that perform fine movements like those of the eyes or fingers have very few muscle fibers in each motor unit to improve the precision of the brain's control over these structures. And muscles that need a lot of strength to perform their function like leg or arm muscles have many muscle cells in each motor unit. One of the ways that the body can control the strength of each muscle is by determining how motor units to activate for a given function, and this explains why the same muscles that are used to pick up a pencil are used also to pick up a bowling ball. And in addition to those topics of the muscular system, let me discuss the contraction cycle. Muscles contract when stimulated by signals from their motor neurons, and motor neuron contract muscle cells at the point called the neuromuscular junction or NMJ. So motor neuron release neurotransmitter chemicals at the NMJ that bond to a special part of the sarcolemma, which is known as the motor end plate. So the motor end plate contains many ion channels that open in response to the neurotransmitter and allow positive ions to enter the muscle fiber. And the positive ion form an electrochemical gradient to form inside of the cell, which spreads throughout the sarcolemma and the teeth tubules by opening even more ion channels. So when the positive ion reach the sarcoplasmic reticulum, carbon ions are released and allowed to flow into the myofibrils. Carbon ions bind the troponin, which causes the troponin molecule to change shape and move nearby molecules of the tropomyosin. So tropomyosin is moved away from the myosin binding sites on the actin molecules, allowing actin and myosin to bind together. And ATP molecules power myosin proteins in the thick filaments to bend and pull the actin molecules in the thin filaments. So myosin proteins act like oars on the boat, pulling the thin filaments closer to the center of the sarcomere. And as the thin filaments are pulled together, the sarcomere shortens and contracts. So myofibrils of the muscle fibers are made of many sarcomeres in a row, so that when all the sarcomeres contract, the muscle cell shortens with the great force relative to its size. Muscles continue contraction as long as they are stimulated by a neurotransmitter. So when a motor neuron stops the release of the neurotransmitter, the process of contraction reverses itself. Calcium returns to the sarcoplasmic reticulum, troponin and tryomyosin return to their resting position, and actin and myosin are prevented from binding, and sarcomeres return to their elongated resting state once the force of myosin pulling on actin has stopped. So certain conditions or disorders such as myoclonus can affect the normal contraction of the muscles. There are also types of muscle contractions. The strength of muscles contraction can be controlled by two factors: the number of the motor units involved in contraction and the amount of stimulus from a nervous system. So a single nerve impulse of a motor neuron will cause a motor unit to contract briefly before relaxing, and this small contraction is known as a twitch contraction. If the motor neuron provides several signals within a short period of time, the strength and duration of the muscle contraction increases, and this phenomenon is known as the temporal summation. If the motor neuron provides many nerve impulses in rapid succession, the muscle may enter the state of tetanus or complete and lasting contraction. A muscle will remain in tetanus until the nerve signal rate is lost or until the muscle becomes too fatigued to maintain the tetanus. And not all muscle contraction produce movement. Isometric contractions are light contractions that increase the tension in the muscle without exerting enough force to move a body part. So when people tense their bodies due to stress, they are performing an isometric contraction. Holding an object still and maintaining posture are also the result of isometric contractions. A contraction that does produce movement is an isotonic contraction. So isotonic contractions are required to develop muscle mass through weightlifting and muscle tone in a natural condition in which a skeletal muscle stays partially contracted at all times. So muscle tone provides a slight tension of the muscle to prevent damage to the muscles and joints from sudden movements, and also helps the muscle maintain the body's posture. And all muscles maintain some amount of muscle tone at times unless the muscle has been disconnected from the central nervous system due to nerve damage. Skeletal muscle fibers can be divided into two types based on how they produce and use energy. They are type 1 and type 2. So for type 1 fibers, they are very slow and deliberate in their contractions, and they are very resistant to fatigue because they are aerobic respiration to produce energy from sugar. We find type 1 fibers in muscles throughout the body for stamina and posture. Near the spine and neck regions, very high concentration of type 1 fibers hold the body up throughout the day. And for type 2 fibers, they're broken down into two subgroups, which are the type 2A and the type 2B. So for type 2A fibers, they are faster and stronger than type 1 fibers, but they do not have as much endurance. Type 2A fibers are found throughout the body, but especially in the legs, where they work to support your body throughout a long day of walking and standing. And the second one is the type 2B fibers, and they're even faster and stronger than the type 2A, but have even less endurance. Type 2B fibers are also much lighter in color than type 1 and type 2A due to their lack of myoglobin. And myoglobin is an oxygen-storing pigment. We find type 2B fibers throughout the body, but particularly in the upper body, where they give speed and strength to the arms and chest at the expense of stamina. Muscle get their energy from different sources depending on the situation that the muscle is working in. Muscles are aerobic respiration when we call on them to produce a low to moderate level of force. Aerobic respiration requires oxygen to produce about 36 to 38 ATP molecules from molecule of glucose. Aerobic respiration is very efficient and can continue as long as a muscle receives adequate amount of oxygen and glucose to keep contracting. So when we use muscles to produce a high level of force, they become so tightly contracted that oxygen-carrying blood cannot enter the muscle. And this condition causes the muscle to create energy using lactic acid fermentation, a form of anaerobic respiration. So anaerobic respiration is much less efficient than aerobic respiration, and only 2 ATP are produced for each molecule of glucose. Muscles quickly tire and they burn through their energy reserves under anaerobic respiration. So to keep muscles working for a longer period of time, muscle fibers contain several important energy molecules. Myoglobin, which is a red pigment found in muscles, contains iron and stores energy, or it stores oxygen, in a manner similar to hemoglobin in the blood. So the oxygen from myoglobin allows muscles to continue aerobic respiration in the absence of oxygen. Another chemical that helps to keep muscles working is creatine, or creatine phosphate. Muscles use energy in the form of ATP, converting ATP to ADP to release its energy, and creatine phosphate donates its phosphate group to ADP to turn it back to ATP, and in order to provide extra energy to the muscle. So finally, muscle fibers contain energy storing glycogen, which is a large macromolecule made of many linked glucoses. Active muscles break glucoses off of glycogen molecules to provide an internal fuel supply. And when muscles run out of energy during either aerobic or anaerobic respiration, the muscle quickly tires and loses its ability to contract, and this condition is known as the muscle fatigue. A muscle fatigue or fatigue muscle contains very little or no oxygen, glucose, or ATP, but instead has many waste products from respiration like lactic acid and ADP. So the body must take an extra oxygen after exertion to replace the oxygen that was stored in myoglobin in the muscle fiber, as well as to power the aerobic respiration that will rebuild the energy supplies inside the cell. So oxygen debt, or recovery oxygen uptake, is the name for the extra oxygen that the body must take in to restore the muscle cells to their resting state. And this explains why you feel out of breath for a few minutes after a strenuous activity. Your body is trying to restore itself to its normal state. So this ends my lecture about the muscular system, and if you have any question, please write it in the comment section down below. And if you haven't subscribed yet to my channel, please do consider subscribing. Also hit the notification bell so that you'll be updated with my new videos. And if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and share. And once again, I would like to thank you all for watching this video and for listening to my discussion. So until my next video, bye everyone!